Okay, thank you for joining us. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance since this is the first meeting of the day. Commissioner Dahl can lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we'll call the meeting to order at 1:31. In order to be respectful of the public's time, we'll try and stay within our meeting time frame and ask everybody to hold their questions until the public comment period. I want to say that our country and our culture seems to be a little bit in a depression lately. High inflation.
Just a second, Mr. Chairman, you should probably announce that it's the Board of Health meeting.
Oh, sorry. This is welcome to the Board of Health meeting. So our country seems to be in a depression lately. High inflation, government's not telling the truth, increasing costs of eggs, meat, gasoline, and then we have a war. These sad realities are felt by most everyone, especially our older citizens on fixed incomes. This new Board of Health can't fix inflation or war, but we can try to help uplift people's spirits in these uncertain times and be truthful to the public. To all, especially children, teens, veterans, and senior citizens, if you're struggling, please know that we have good people in the HHS offices on 9th Avenue with lots of resources that are available to help you. And I think you need to reach out if you're feeling down because you're not alone. So going to old business and speaking of uplifting spirits, one of the old items on the business is flags to try and uplift. I wanted to know if you have some flags up? Carol is indicating there's some flags up, so that's good. Thank you very much for that. Next item is to review and accept the minutes for the past meeting. Everybody should have received them already and hopefully read them. And I'd entertain a motion to accept them if
I make a motion.
I make a motion to accept the minutes from our last meeting.
We need a second.
You want a second? You have a second.
We need a second. Yeah, there's a second. Okay, would you like to discuss anybody have any comments on the minutes from the past meeting? Well, with no discussion, then the motion is to approve the minutes as written. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. So the minutes are accepted. And then can I ask the staff to come up to the table, please? Thank you. They would like to give us some information on the HYS, which is a Healthy Youth Survey overview.
Hey, good afternoon, Board of Health. Gina James, Health and Human Services. This was sort of a carryover item. We had some brief discussion about the Healthy Youth Survey data back in the fall. The Board of Health had asked for kind of a summary or an overview of that data. And so what you see in front of you is that overview. I think we had sent it out before as well. I'm not going to go through and read verbatim through the points, but I'll just point out kind of the highlights from the data. So there's through the slides, what was highlighted is there's substance abuse, mental health, and physical health. So the substance use data, when looking at that data, the highlights from reviewing that data over time, and keep in mind some of not the data is not all consistent over the years. So you'll notice that some of the questions were asked differently in the healthy use survey data over the years. So you'll see that kind of in some of the slides. And as a reminder, this wasn't a survey we did. This is a survey the state does, Department of Health. So on the substance abuse topic, looking back at the data over time, just a couple of the highlights of the trends. Vaping, alcohol, and marijuana were the most commonly used substances. And all seem to be declining. Use of all substances seem to be declining except for marijuana and vape pens. And it gives kind of some details from the data there. It does look like our data is similar to statewide patterns. With the mental health slides, there's 2 slides that kind of summarize mental health.
If I could take you back to the substance abuse one,
Mhm.
can you share that on the screen? You don't have it? I look at the races and they all go south. And they all go down time. So vape pens is still going down, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. I was kind of looking at that too. So the vape pens, for example, that's the darkest brown line that you see on the chart. That one only goes back to 2012. So when you look at 2012 compared to 2021, it's going slightly up. So the summary is from like as far back as we have to the 2021 data. And so for that particular one with vape pens, they didn't start collecting or asking about vape pens until 2012. And then when you compare that to 2021, it's a little bit higher in 2021. So that's why, but yeah, when you look at it just at first glance, it looks like everything's going down. But when you drill down to the year itself, let's see. With marijuana is the other one that was highlighted. That one does look like it went down a little bit, so I'll have to verify that one. Or, okay, yeah. So I'll have to double check that one maybe.
So follow up on that is, and stop me if you're going to go over it at the later part. This is the data. Are we going to engage in trying to hear explanations of it? So like we think vaping is down or up because
Not today. That's something we could look into doing. I think this data is hard because it's the kids' responses to the questions. And so it's kind of, it's their self-reported information. But we could drill down farther into it and have Shannon, we could ask Shannon to come and answer some more in-depth questions about the data.
hey, maybe I can just ask it. I'm surprised that it would show any decline at all, anything except for cigarettes.
Sip alcohol.
Mm.
Is that also kind of your impression?
I am surprised to see
Doesn't make sense.
declines. Yeah. I can hear you.
Gina, can I say something? Arn, is that okay? I wonder, is there another source of information that we could pull some of this data to make more sense? Because to me, it doesn't make sense either that marijuana would be going down just from anecdotal experience around me. And that's not extensive, and then the vaping, everybody's vaping. And I that's a generalization. I recognize that, but are there other sources that we can use to compile information that would give us bigger picture.
More
that-
information.
I mean, rather than just a healthy youth survey alone, is there,
Mhm.
whether through the school counselors or in Fort law enforcement or, I
We
don't
can
know.
try to see what's available, off the
Or
top
the
of my
pot
head.
shops? Do the-
Yeah,
Do the pot shops keep records?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Go to
We-
the source.
Yeah, we could try to see what other data is available around this.
Yeah, actually, you point out something interesting. You can just look at what the state revenue is on the pot shops.
Yeah.
Revenue, yeah.
This is children. My question is, hasn't the hospital done some analysis and some community assessments, Peace Health in the last couple of years?
They have done some community-based assessments.
Would that be a source of information as well?
We could pull that report, yeah.
Or your treatment centers also? Although they don't.
Yeah.
they
This,
probably don't
this
treat.
survey is voluntary survey,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so we don't really even know how many kids participate.
Yeah, I think,
It's 25% or it's 10% or it's 90%.
It's anonymous also.
yeah, we might, I think on the Healthy Youth Survey site, they might give an indication of how many students completed it, but yeah, it's voluntary.
Voluntary.
And
Yeah.
anonymous, yeah.
I just point out too that these papers are for the 10th graders only, where I've seen the others in the 12th graders, the numbers are different.
Mhm.
So this one is only
Good
talking about
point.
the 10th graders. But I think that all of this survey is great for our new advisory committee to look into. I think this is good information and the advisory committee could really get some good information out of this.
I agree.
Yeah, we could look at some other data sources too. You know, we always have to keep in mind, this is the results from one survey, you know, that's out there. So,
Chairman Whipper.
I just want to observe that the data ends just about the time the pandemic took hold and wiped out school attendance, and our figures are really not very accurate during
Yeah,
the
good.
pandemic.
good
'cause
point.
Absenteeism so tremendous. So it's pretty tough to draw a whole lot of conclusions. I'd be interested in looking at some of the evidence that is available through our therapeutic courts that focus on juveniles and family. That could probably give us a much better idea of the numbers of problems. And certainly we have been monitoring, the board has been monitoring the problems in the jail. Our capacity in the jail is negatively impacted by the number of people who have serious mental health problems because they're in by themselves. And so we can't have as many prisoners because most of the cells are for 2 or more people. So I think that kind of data is going to be helpful, at least as far as I'm concerned, for me helping to set priorities, because this is interesting, but there's a lot of flaws in the validity of the numbers.
I think the difficulty with any of the data sources is they're self-selected in some way and presume that those in drug court or in the jail are not really general population.
But they certainly are indications of seriousness of public health challenges that we need to be addressing. If we've got a lot of kids having a problem, if we've got a lot of adults having problems coping, the number that are in jail is a small portion. That doesn't mean we just disregard that. as
It's
being
interesting, but
insignificant. It
before it
helps
gets
us.
there, it's going through all kinds of
Mhm.
filtering. They have to be arrested. They have to go before the prosecutor. He has to decide. Candidate. Sounds like my mic is in and out.
It's all,
I'd just add too, the one thing that I learned is that the jails, after they do their MAT treatment center program, they step the prisoners down off of the drugs, and after they go out of that jail to their regular court, their court hearings, we were told that they don't track them after that. So they really don't know what the recidivism rate is, because they kind of lose track of the person, which kind of makes sense. I don't know if the jail's responsibility is to track everybody who's done drugs, but I know that that information is just not there.
But yeah, at this point, we're really just trying to find out how big a problem we have. And bits of data from every place are useful.
It's again, a good thing for the committee to look at, because that's a lot of information. Did you have more on that one, Gina?
Oh, I was just going to add, and I think we may not be surprised, the mental health slides, there's two of them. One looks at the past year experience, and the second one looks at current experience, and they have kind of similar results. There's sort of an increase in depressive feelings and an increase in contemplated suicide. I think there's been some discussion about that, or concern about that with this group. And then looking at physical health, there's a couple different slides that kind of capture the physical health. There's been, according to this survey, an increase in students that report being overweight or obese from 2018. And then it also looked at sugary beverages and eating fruits and vegetables each day. And so the data in some of those is kind of hit and miss, again, where it was asked some years, but maybe not others. It looks like the sugar sweetened beverages have stayed roughly the same. And the same with eating fruits and vegetables. And I heard a
Back in
okay.
back in the old days, like in 10th grade, we would, in PE, we would have to go through a nationwide test of some sort. In other words, they said, how many pull-ups can you do? How many push-ups can you do? And sit-ups, and that will get reported in. I assume that's no longer done.
I'm not sure.
You know, I've seen some. rather
It's not,
large-
Arn. It's not, that is not being done anymore.
The
And in
president's
fact,
health.
many schools, and I'm not sure Cowlitz County, I have to check for sure, but I know many schools do not require PE anymore. That's an option. PE, physical education.
Which is not a good trend.
Mm-mm.
We can work on that.
Yeah.
So there was an article in the paper, the Daily News, and I know we can't believe everything we see in the Daily News, but it talked about the 2021 Washington Healthcare Authority's Youth Health Survey reported that 40% of 8th and 10th graders consistently felt hopeless in the last 2 weeks. They quit hobbies, and 20% of 10th graders considered suicide. And if that's not a red flag, that I think that this
Yeah.
organization, this committee, this I don't know, Board of Health needs to be concerned about. To me, that's a huge issue we need to take a closer look at.
It's an excellent point, and the main overall point we made at the last meeting was that the #1 cause of death for the youth, suicide. Right here.
Depression.
Well, there's suicide, and also akin to that is, what do I have to lose? I'm going to try it. And they survive. It's not quite a suicide, but. it's the-
Attempted suicide, I guess.
You know,
Yeah.
we got a lot of problems. We got a lot of problems, and I told the security guard on the way in this morning that I was gonna fix everything today, but
Well,
I
don't give
know
up.
that's not gonna happen.
We have our advisory committee, though, that's been developed, and I'm looking forward to working with those people because a lot, more than one person is very helpful when we try to figure out things. So we're going to get some ideas and bring it to the Board of Health and try to see if there's some things that we can target and work on. We don't want to give up or sound, like overwhelmed from this report. It's just life. We've been dealing with it. It's not new. But now we need to move on and say, what are we going to do about it? And I know that some things are cooking in your department. And I'm not saying you need to talk about it right now, but I'm not hopeless. But thank you, Mary Jane. You're right.
So I have a question. I had to jump out of the last meeting. early, so I don't know who else is on the committee outside of Mr. Ott. Is there, has the membership of the committee expanded since our last meeting?
There's a few members.
Can you share that with us right now?
I think since I don't even know the last names of some of these
Oh.
people, I think I'll wait and I'll come back to you on that.
Like today or,
Sure.
okay, thank you.
Ancillary question, how soon are we going to interact with the board of, with the advisory board?
Well, I'm getting to that point. Let's, are you finished with that part?
Yeah, I think the last highlight I just wanted to point out, which is probably not a surprise, there was according to this survey, an increase in screen time with kids, which I think we all probably may have guessed. But that is a concern as well.
And I think it was 4 hours of screen time to 1 hour of exercise. Does that sound correct to you, what I remember?
Yes,
from
that
the report.
sounds right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and like I mentioned, we can look at some other data sources too that touch on these topics. So we can look at a variety of information.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to the next point. And I will get back to you what your question was, Arn, coming up. So let's move on to the RV parks, campground sanitation codes. We talked about them at the last meeting, and now we have some new red line documents. And just like to discuss this a little further. Have questions or comments on it?
Yes, sir. One of the questions I always have to ask when we get updated codes, how much of this is dictated by the state? We had to make these changes.
I'll speak to my portion, not the planning portion. I'm not aware that there were any state requirements to change this. It really was to separate the health standards and planning standards locally.
Can you introduce yourself? I don't
Oh,
think I know
I'm so
you.
sorry. I'm Susan Long. I'm the environmental health manager with Health and Human Services.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I have just one question on in the presentation. It says existing code is a burden on the expansion of pre-existing parks. So this is saying that there's a burden for a campground owner, and that's why we want to change the code. What were those burdens?
Again, that's the planning portion. I don't want to dive too much into their code. I'm just not as familiar with it, but essentially my understanding is for existing campgrounds, if you wanted to add 1 or 2 more spaces, for example, you had to go through the whole process again. I believe the new planning code, once adopted, will allow a few spaces over a certain amount of time. That doesn't have to go through the whole hearing examiner review. I think there's an administrative process, so that should make it a little easier for parks to expand, at least on a limited basis.
So I'm not sure which one we're looking at. Is it this one?
So my preference, I mean, there is the red line version, but it's quite messy. I would suggest we use just the clean draft version.
To look at?
And we can go through each section if that's helpful. And then if there's questions that come up along the way, we can stop for discussion. If that,
So we separated because the planning says, our understanding is if they apply for 2 spaces or 3 spaces, then they want to add, it has to go through the process again. I'm wondering why planning doesn't look at the overall picture and say, you could have up to 6 spaces on here with this, and we'd approve that and cut some of that other nonsense out. It's probably not a question for you, but it just seems like we get in our own way at times.
You have a line number on the draft
Which
one
page is it?
that I could look
Is
at?
it this page that we're talking about? See, there's 2 pages, right?
So I serve on the planning commission, and I will tell you that they have wrestled with this for some time to try to make, recognizing that there's a shortage of RV spaces in the community. And they have this laundry list of folks who are interested in creating a new RV campsite, but it's been so onerous. And so the whole effort for the planning commission and the planning staff was to streamline the whole process. So people can be more easily permitted and have some more additional flexibility in terms of recreational RV camping. And I'm wondering if it makes sense at some point, if we're unable to get through this today, to actually have a planning staff person attend the meeting to hold our hand and walk us through this so that everybody's on the same page.
I'm sure we could arrange that, yeah.
Yeah, think I would add on to that, this also cleans up some of the pitfalls we have seen from Boise decision and Grants Pass decision. The prosecuting attorney's office has gone over this. True, yeah, and I think they did a good job.
It's a lot of stuff to read, but we should, yeah, I think there's going to be a public hearing for this too. And at that point, maybe you could have what Mary Jane was requesting, the person to kind of go through it, guide us through it. That'd probably be good then. Reading through it. Sorry?
Is that like a work session, or is it just like what we're doing right now, except
Pub-
it's going to be in a little bit greater detail, but we're still going to have to flip through things very quickly, or?
It's a public hearing. Has to-
I think there would be a hearing, and at that time, we would want to hear, like, Mary Jane's question, I would translate into, tell us, not every line of this document, tell us what problem was addressed and how you addressed it.
And one of the problems is I've read through it. One of the problems that I have that I found, and I'm just going to read it and so people can understand. So the code applies to campgrounds and RV campgrounds and of course in the codes, there are always certain exemptions in the codes, which make sense. So some of these do make sense. For example, and I'm referring to 15.45.050 on the old one. We're talking about lines number 98 through 106, but I'll just read it to you. These entities are exempt from this code. A day use area makes sense. Day use, you're not supposed to be camping there all night, should be exempt from that. Temporary campgrounds or construction campgrounds also don't think they need to install sewer systems. It doesn't make sense. Recreational vehicle storage area. That is for all these big places that are parking lots full of RVs. Again, I'd say that makes sense that they're exempt too. But I have a problem with this added exemption. Homeless camps are exempt from all county codes. That doesn't make sense to me. And I spoke at length yesterday with the attorney. It is something to do with the Boise case that Commissioner Mortensen brought up, but it is basically saying that a designated homeless camp, a site sanctioned by state or local officials for housing of transient persons, following review and exemption by the health officer, they are exempt. And to me, just to use an example of our local homeless camp, if the city of Longview decides they want to make a homeless camp, I think instead of being exempt from county health and septic and sewer issues, they should be the pinnacle of county septic sewer issues. So I don't think that this line should just be removed. And speaking with the lawyer yesterday, he did agree that it could be, and that the health officer still has jurisdiction over it, as the health officer has had in the last couple of years.
Well, and I agree with you. I read that and I was confused as to why we wouldn't be concerned about their health and hygiene in this setting any more than the rest of them. And, you know, I don't want to use the word discrimination, but it does seem unfair that they have to do all of that and the camps don't. And it is really about health and safety.
You know,
That's how I see it.
if the city of Longview is proposing to help people, well, they should follow the codes like anybody else who's making a campground. And to me, it even seems like if a city is actually going to do it, they should above and beyond the codes. So in this case, my suggestion is to just simply remove this exemption D, letter D.
So does this code have any standing inside the city limits?
My understanding from Doug Jensen is this code does not. I think the purpose of D was really to illustrate that while the city can set up camps where they would like within their jurisdiction, that the health officer still does have some sway and can still inspect these and make sure that the health and safety is being adhered to. So I think the way that it's written doesn't necessarily state that. I think it's a little confusing. Doug Jensen did send us all an email with some modified language. He suggested that we basically take out the word camp and put site sanctioned by instead. So I don't know.
Take out the word camp
I'm
and
sorry.
substitute what?
He designated homeless, and instead of camp, we would take out camp and a site, so that those three words would be removed.
I'm sorry, I
Thank
can't
you.
hear you very well.
Sorry,
It's
I
okay.
keep forgetting about this mic. So for designated homeless camp, we would take out the word camp, and then there's a comma and it says a site. We would take out a site, so those three words, and then just leave designated homeless sanctioned. I'm sorry, we would leave it as designated homeless site sanctioned by the state or local officials, et cetera, et cetera. So that was his suggestion. Again, we can just remove the entire line. That section D doesn't need to stand. The health officer does have jurisdiction over the city when it comes to health, so.
So my question is, and I guess when I read this, I presume because this document pertains to recreational sites and not arbitrary groups of people who set up a bunch of tents.
No, it's campsites too.
But that's why they exempted it. So that's not, is that this pertains to law abiding campsites? People who are trying to comply with the regulations, not a
Unhosted.
unhosted or a arbitrary group of folks. And that was just my assumption. And when you pull the word camp out, then that's considered, I mean, to me, that they're exempt because they're breaking all the rules. So this can't apply to them because they're not a officially permitted campsite. Can't be recreational site.
Right, under 1545. Right, that would be correct. They would still, or they could still meet health standards under health officer authority of 70.05.
What is the purpose of the exemption, though? I'm still confused about health and safety, what that has to do with any of that issue.
If I might ask, did you take a look at the email Doug Jensen sent us, but maybe 11:06 a.m.?
No, I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it.
Pretty well sways me to saying we got to go along with Doug. Basically, I think what he's saying is what Mary Jane is saying, but we have to be a little careful to exclude situations that paint us into a violation of what has just happened in Grants Pass also. And I would wanted to check and see if we had anybody from the PA's office on. Maybe that would be wonderful having.
When you say that, do they help?
Generally, the clerk of the board always does those things magically in the background.
I think Doug Jensen said he had a conflict today.
What does Dr. Krager think? May I ask that?
I'm sorry?
I'd like to just ask what Dr. Krager thinks of his opinion of
Doc-
that, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's a great
Go
question.
ahead and feel free to occupy that bench also.
Yeah, you said- go back.
There we go.
Thank you, Commissioner Mortensen. Yeah, I've been, this is Dr. Steve Krager, the Deputy Health Officer for Cowlitz County.
So Steve, so your forehead is always cut off. Can you adjust the
He's
camera just a little
tall.
bit? Push the top back a little bit.
And
There you go.
microphone as close as you can tolerate.
Is that good?
Perfect. Better.
I would also like to have this discussion with the prosecuting attorney's office. I think we certainly have jurisdiction over, any health and safety concern. Health officer power is pretty broad in addressing that, and what we can do to address that. I haven't had that discussion yet with the prosecuting attorney, so I want to talk about the language. Following review and exemption by the health official, which is defined as the health officer. I think I would prefer that not be a formal review process, but I do think there does need to be some sort of, check to make sure that it is not, an encampment is not, a health risk to the community, but we don't really have a good process for like a formal way to do that, right? So that's something, I'd love to have that conversation with the prosecuting attorney and see if we can come up with some language that makes sense, doesn't cede any authority, and makes that authority clear.
So I'd like to draw your attention to line 118 on that list. I think that is probably the huge hole in terms of vague language. It simply says, and this is item C.
Excuse me, Dennis, which document?
Oh, the finished document.
The
Not-
finished
not the
document, and the
red
line
line.
number again?
The skinnier one.
118.
Thank you.
It's just right up above 119 where we were talking about a designated homeless campsite. But line 118 says temporary campgrounds or construction campgrounds. Those first two words is a gigantic hole. That means we exempt anybody who sets up a camp anywhere.
Yeah.
And I have this image in my mind of the unauthorized camping that was going on above the railroad tracks up it's inside the city of Longview. That was a huge mess
Right.
and no regulation there. And I don't think we want to get into a situation where we're not allowed to regulate something like that.
Absolutely.
So that we need to have a little bit different language on temporary campground.
So if
Except the
you,
definition handles it, right? Line 103.
It's the definition of temporary is 2 weeks max.
And it also gives the health official, health officer sort of control over it.
also line 126 goes into temporary use permits for those types of campground facilities and requirements that they would have to adhere to. So it is outlined on the next page of the code.
So it seems to me like this is not the right vehicle to address the homeless camps. That because this is designed really for folks who are following the rules and who want to create a RV campsite. And so, and these rules apply to them. And it feels like there needs to be another, document that really specifically refers to the temporary campgrounds. The homeless
Except
situation.
I think the intent is precisely not to have
Additional document.
a document that tells what. The moment you say you cannot use public land for sleeping, you end up starting to cross some lines that the courts have said you cannot cross.
It feels like we're trying to address two different issues with this single document. Maybe that was the intent. But it feels like these are two very different animals. One is the licensed RV provider who wants to follow the rules.
Yeah.
And the other is folks who are simply camping illegally.
It depends on how you define the rules. These people, based on Boise decision and the Grants Pass decision, are not illegal. That we put constraints on them makes us illegal by these court decisions. If we want to fight that, you might talk me into it. I'm just trying to explain.
But maybe we need to have an attorney when we continue this conversation.
Well, and it sounds like, Dr. Krieger, you have some oversight in the county, no matter where it is. Does that kind of cover the issue in a broad way, like you were saying, so that we're not having to nitpick what you call it, as long as you're looking at it, whatever it's existing as long as it's not a health issue? I don't know. I mean, I understand. I don't know anything about the Boise thing. I'm sorry. But I'm just trying to get down to health and safety, no matter what kind of an established piece of thing it is that people are in.
Right.
That's my concern. And I don't know how you want to state that in any of this draft, but just to cover that specific thing, that they made a specific thing in this document,
Right.
you know, that can be a real problem, that type of arrangement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I would argue that Dr. Krieger already has that authority and he's already been able to do that in some of these situations. And
Yeah.
if somebody started camping out right here and was getting disgusting, you could do something about that. So I don't think that, and because of the fact that this is confusing language and it will exempt the existing Longview homeless camp from complying with any kind of codes, I think because we have the safety net of the health officer already having jurisdiction over it, and that the lawyer told me that it is confusing, and here Susan says we know it's confusing. Why add a confusing law into anything when we already have a law that's existing that works?
You mentioned something that you described as the Longview homeless camp. You know, that does not exist anymore.
But
That campground is gone. It's done.
Spread out all over the
there's
city.
a shelter there, there's a,
Oh, there's a shelter. That's, yeah, goes, you mean the pallet homes?
the
Is that what you're talking
Camp
about?
Hope. They
Yeah.
call it Camp Hope.
No, Hope Village. It's not a campground.
Mhm.
Those pallets aren't even on wheels, so it's not even RV stuff.
Yeah, but in truth, that.
But let's be careful. If it's about that unhosted horrible jungle, yes, that should have been regulated a long time ago.
But don't, even this one though, should be regulated.
We wouldn't know. We haven't studied it.
Dr. Krieger that's at your disposal, that's at your disposal to go through that ballot
We have,
city, right? If you need to.
we
And-
do have Doug Jennings is on the line. Doug, can you hear us?
Hello? Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
Good
thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. Okay, so some of this you're not going to want to hear, but I'm going to say it anyway. And as Commissioner Mortensen pointed out, what you're really talking about are federal Ninth Circuit cases, most recently Blake versus City of Grants Pass, and before that Martin versus Boise, which basically said to the extent that governments have exercised their police power authority or their regulatory authority to restrict camping and, pardon me, and temporary occupancy of public property, those local laws that prohibit an individual from sitting, lying, sleeping, or camping on public property when that individual has no alternative shelter available cannot be enforced. And it's not so much confusing as it's a gray area of situations you'll find yourself in. So although there are some regulations you can implement for purposes of when and where you can actually utilize public property, the types of regulations you're looking at now for purposes of Planning Commission and the health code that overlays it really don't mesh well and really don't mesh at all with what you're talking about with trying to deal with City of Boise and camping on public property. So one of the things you look at when even for the existing code, when you look at what it covers campgrounds, which under the definition of 1545 talks about a parcel or tract of real property that is designed for camping, recreational vehicle camping, or outdoor recreation containing 3 or more camping spaces offered for use of the public and members of the private or religious organizations. And then when you go down to, for instance, what purposes of 1545 are to ensure the public health, safety, and welfare of all recreational vehicle parks and campgrounds within Cowlitz County, including the incorporated areas as well as unincorporated areas. So focus really of both the health regulations and what the Planning Commission is looking at for RV and camping really addresses the county's more common development codes, development regulations under 3670, which is the Planning Enabling Act, and an overlay of health code under 7005 to allow them to assert sanitary and health codes on those regulated land use properties. There's a third area, and that is, so we have what we normally call our land use regulated campgrounds and parks that are subject to planning, zoning, and health regulations. Then you have, municipal parks, and we have an actual park code and I believe a park board that establishes those. But then you get into this third court-created gray area that is not really part of the county's normal regulation and planning, that for homeless use of public property. And that's the reason why that section is in there. And is that when I talked to Mr. Lane, what I noted was that whether you keep that in there, that phrasing, or strike it, in reality, it's going to apply under court law. So the best we can do is assert some type of monitoring and action by the health official or the health officer, as I would term out of just tradition, to oversee those types of what the press would call an encampment, what the courts would call homeless occupancy, and that health oversight forms the basis for things such as ordering cleanups or requiring or facilitating relocations from a particular piece of public property based on the health officer's finding of an emergent need to protect the public health and safety. So the language is what it is, and the law is what it is. My only reason for including it was that I'm sort of a fan of transparency. I don't want people to have expectations that this code is going to be a magic bullet for the homeless crisis and some of the sanitary and solid waste issues we're encountering with homeless encampments. That's really going much more complicated. It really involves working through and with the health officer, and that's really where your strength lies in dealing with it locally. Now, there are some things the county can do for limiting where and what county property is being utilized, and our offices discussed that in the past with, or beginning with when Love Overwhelming was situated near the administration building itself. But as a general proposition, you can't enact what I would term development regulations or sanitary codes that are basically anti-camping in relation to homeless occupancies. So that's where we get to my comment of why I included that as an exemption. And I agree with Mr. Lane that keep it, strike it, But again, my intention of including it was the need to put people on notice that there are certain limitations on what this health provisions are going to do.
Can you put a qualifier in that section that says that it will be under the jurisdiction of our county health officer? Just as a high five to whoever's reading this?
I think it's on there.
Oh, is it on there? Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, that's really why I put that in there. Is I think I
Oh, following the review.
colloquially called it a shot across the bow, which is probably inappropriate, but I said it, and so I'll take ownership of it. But it's to put local jurisdictions on notice that regardless of their actions to comply or what they view as complying with City of Boise, that our health department retains jurisdiction, which is countywide.
I just want it to be strong enough to where it won't be overlooked. That's
Sure.
all, in your language.
No, I understand. So
Does-
that's my entire input. I'm neutral on it. It's just, like I said, it's just a personal preference of mine on transparency to make sure people understand what Chapter 1545 is and is not.
So in the interest of time, and since that Doug Jennings has provided some new wording already this morning, I think we should just hold on to this and come back to this again at the next meeting with maybe with the new language that you're gonna put in, and I think we're gonna have to talk through it again.
Well, I would still like to suggest a little bit of wordsmithing for item C. Because as was pointed out, temporary campgrounds by definition have been approved. But the construction campgrounds have not, and those, that seems to me there should be handled a little bit differently, because the construction ones, I didn't read where they are approved by the health officer. And that
think you're
definition
correct.
is on line 40 in that clean copy.
Yeah.
So your revision to both the D and the B you're talking about.
So you could say temporary campgrounds as defined, and then another bullet that says construction campgrounds. Because I don't want people to get confused on that.
That would be simple like that too.
That should be a simple one. Yeah.
So I have a couple questions, and one probably for Doug Jensen. I have been reluctant to think of the health officer as a political tool for us to accomplish something like elimination of homelessness, or you name it. It's one of those Pandora's boxes that I think we should be very careful that the health officer is really specifically focused on tangible health issues.
Well, and that's the standard he would be held to, or she would be held to. When there's a decision to, I'm not going to use the word sweep because I don't think those really happen anymore. I mean, there's certainly a perspective from others that all of these things are sweeps, but generally when there's a need to go in and clean up a site because of public health and safety concerns, the health officer will document the justification for posting the site and be able to provide the health bases why both the cleanup and potential relocation and offering of placing people in shelter space is important. So
Okay, thank you.
part of that's to be guided by, what the community's health standards are and its approach to health standards. And I don't necessarily view that as political. It's part of the customs and culture of the locality.
And
But I understand what you're saying. I do. I'm not challenging that. In practicality, I think there are enough checks and balances for that not to occur.
So we want to make sure that our code is very clear that gives the health officer the authority to go. And I know there was a lot of ambiguity with that jungle, that so-called encampment. that was not shut down, even though it was a horrible place. Not only criminal activities, but health concerns. So I think moving forward with something like this, I think as Doug was saying, that helps clarify. We're not using you for political purposes. It is definitely health concerns that you can do some regulation.
So then a couple of questions for over there. The press to fix this is it should be fixed as soon as possible, but it doesn't have to be fixed by next Tuesday or something like that. True?
True, yeah.
Okay, and then for Dennis, when the process would be the Board of Health would the big we here would kind of come up with this code change, and then the Board of County Commissioners has to call a public hearing if they're so inclined, right?
The Board of County Commissioners has to adopt the policy.
I believe it's the Board of Health that adopts this policy, is my understanding.
It's a Calais County code.
Yes, but it's under the Board of Health. I don't know, Doug, are you still on?
Yeah, so
Run
it's as a, again, using the phrase customs and culture, a lot of what other counties would have adopted through the Board of Health, because this really is a health code. have gone through the Board of
Doug, could you get
Commissioners.
closer to the phone and
How's
repeat what
that?
you just said?
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
I'm glad when I'll be glad when they replace these phones. Another try. Okay, so one of the customs and culture in Cowlitz has been to run what other counties normally would treat as public health ordinances through their Board of County Commissioners and not the Board of Health. This really is a public health ordinance powered under 7005 in particular, and with involvement and direct oversight by your health officer. My only recommendation would be, strictly from a pretty myopic legal viewpoint, would be to run it through your Board of Health.
I'm sorry, I still didn't hear that last one, and I
run
understand
it-
I'm myopic, and I agree with you. And I mean that.
It's
that
as
in
a
good
legal
jest.
perspective. I would run it through the Board of Health, and then have it adopted as through the and have it codified. Your on-site system regulations are an example of regulations adopted by the Board of Health and then codified within the county code.
So who would be holding the public hearing?
The Board of Health.
Okay, and what's the lead time? We have to publicize the hearing.
I would, what I've always advised my boards of health is that the expectation is that you would match what the Board of County Commissioners follow for purposes of exercising their police power authority under 32-120. In other words, follow the same ordinance adoption process. And I think, and again, that's every other venue I've worked at has done that as well. They've matched what the board does for purposes of advertising and holding the public hearings and the lead time between public notice and hearing.
If I might ask the chairman of the BOCC, did you follow that? I'm a little confused because I think I heard that this board can fill the county code book with all kinds of things. And I'd assume that was really the responsibility of the BOCC.
Well, I think council said run it through the Board of Health for their recommendation, but ultimately, because it's been our customary practice, we have the three of us have the final say. So the thing that concerns me a little bit is that if we only meet quarterly, it's going to be a long time before we can do some additional wordsmithing.
We can add some meetings if we need to. It'll be no problem. The next meeting is April 25th, so about a month and a half from now.
So I do actually have kind of a a question or perhaps an offer that I haven't run by the commission, and that is we are beginning to have an evening workshop Wednesday evenings on the second Wednesdays of the month. Engaged, designed to elicit public, more public participation. I'm wondering if this might be an appropriate topic to have on that workshop, kind of co-hosted by the two boards. And
That sounds
I
okay to
don't
me.
want, I don't want to take a whole
Yeah.
quarter before we
No, that sounds okay.
That would be
next Wednesday, 1 week.
in 1 week?
In the 5:30? If that's okay. I mean,
I won't be here, but I have every confidence that that's
did we have anything
maybe
else
a
scheduled
blessing
for that?
for you.
Okay,
So it was Wednesday evening?
5:30, yeah. I want to make sure. That was my idea. I want to make sure my colleagues are okay with that.
Yeah. You okay with that, Arn? You're not? Cause you won't be here to
Yeah.
weigh in.
And just to talk about this code?
Sure.
Okay.
I guess my question is for staff to see if you can incorporate the comments that you've heard today in terms of the attorney from the Mr. Jensen's comments and Dennis's concerns, so that there could be something for this board to, or this group to look at in a week and a day.
Yes, absolutely. I can get that to you.
So let's hold this over, table this until 5:30 next Wednesday.
And I would only ask if it becomes contentious and one more vote would make a difference, then maybe we can hold it over again.
Yep.
But can I have one more? And maybe would it make sense to have some planning staff folks attend so that they can answer specific planning questions as well?
I can certainly ask. I don't know what their availability
Invite
would
them,
be so
but they're
soon,
busy.
but.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They will be here. I think the commission can say that.
Now, that's just the workshops, not the
Workshop.
hearing.
Well, it's a public hearing, so. But the final adoption would, as is always the case for code changes.
So the workshop is, all of this stuff will be in the public view,
Public participation
but the official public hearing will be from the Board of County Commissioners.
when we finally adopt, yeah, upon the recommendation from this board.
Yeah.
Okay. That's clear to me, so 5:30.
Okay, so moving on to the next item, just real quick, just want to talk about the CHIP report, Community Health Improvement Plan that came from 2014. I reviewed this, a few people have looked at it. I just want to say that there was a lot of thought and work that went into this, and some research, and I think it's a good place to start. And again, I'd like to put this towards the, for the advisory committee to look into. There's already been a lot of work done on there, and you guys all should have it's about 60 pages, I think, and it was sent out a couple weeks ago. I think the clerk sent it out. Then moving on to the next item I have, was the website, but since we're kind of running a little late, there's a few things on there. And again, I just want to say that is an excellent item for the advisory committee to look through, because there's a lot of things to look through on the website, and some changes to be made. And I would just say to the board, if anybody finds errors or problems on any kind of like that, the website, to please let us know. And then now I'll get to the advisory board, the Board of Health Advisory Committee, sorry, not board, but a Board of Health Advisory Committee update. The chairman, he was not able to come today because of a scheduling conflict, but he should be here at the next one. And are working on a mission statement and purpose and principles. And that should come out, I would say, in the next few days. And I'll make sure everybody gets a chance to look at that and have some input into that.
But we don't know who the members of the committee are.
We do, and I'll have to get back to you because like I said, I don't even know the last name of everybody.
So, and I wasn't at the last meeting, so I'm not sure what the process was. My understanding is this board approved Mr. Ott. Did they approve all the other names too?
No, didn't have to. According to the lawyers, it didn't have to be. The lawyers told us that it's not part of the, it's since they're an advisory committee, they don't have the same,
Yeah, the key issue is they have no hold over us. They're simply advisory. It's like inviting someone like we try to do on Tuesdays. We'd like to hear from the public, and this is slightly more organized, but completely advisory.
yeah.
So, and so my question is, as the state law that set us up tried to make sure that there were particular stakeholders included on the board membership, are we trying to have a broad-based advisory, or is it just people that you picked?
No, I've opened it up to everybody in the public and to the board. And so far, that's what we've got. Those are the only people that responded were some people that were interested.
But I think the world is multidimensional out there when it comes to this. We're representing at most probably 4 dimensions here. The BOCC counts as maybe 1 dimension, even though there are 3 of us, possibly. Anyhow, it's an arguable thing. Having no constraints over the advisory board itself and the self-appointed advisory board, it's something I know I'd like to try and see just what comes out of it. Fully knowing that we have the last say on the whole issue. It doesn't, I would not throw away any citizen that comes up with advice.
And the lawyers were pretty clear that this is their advisory role, not a rulemaking committee.
And I did offer up a name for Mr. Lane as a recommendation for the advisory committee. So hopefully that name was considered.
So going to the next step is a mental health report from Commissioner Weber, coming back from a Washington DC trip. What's the mental health like in the Capitol?
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't dare try to comment on that. We probably have all of our own opinions.
But that's
on
the
it.
easiest one to comment on.
Really, actually, so the conference I went to was sponsored by the National Association of County. And as a result, there were counties represented all over across the board. And a part of the activity was preparing position statements for adoption at the national conference next summer, setting policy for the National Association to lobby. And so one of the workshops we had was a summit conference on mental health. And we heard reports from various counties across the nation. And what struck me and what I wanted to share with folks here is that the innovations that have been tried that elsewhere to great acclaim are some of the very things that we've been implementing here with the therapeutic courts, with MAT as part of it, continuing MAT in jail time, and in particular, the navigators who work with the perpetual people, going through the revolving doors in the court system, and the navigators that are going out on police calls and trying to comment. And I was thinking, as I was listening to this, it was like, we're right at the forefront. It seems to me, my impression was we don't have to bow down to anybody. We're doing some really good stuff in Cowlitz County in terms of trying to address it. Of course, it's a matter of quantity and quality. I mentioned a challenge that we still have with our jail, still too many people with untreated mental illness, but we're putting the tools in place to tackle that better than we have in the past. So I came back kind of encouraged that we're headed in the right direction. Medically assisted treatment. Yeah, sorry. And it actually, they've changed the terms, but it means the same thing. If you're on a medical program, it doesn't get cut off when you go to jail. So,
Mr. Chairman, this may be an appropriate time for me to comment about an observation I made at the Housing Homeless Task Force. Gina she does a yeoman's job there, and one of the methods is to bring in speakers, and in this case that I have in mind, she brought in 2 speakers. I don't recall their names, which is a good thing, but they are part of what you call the navigators.
Okay, yeah.
And hearing them speak was a little bit discouraging because I had been part of saying, yeah, let's go do this. But it wasn't the idea of creating another welfare arm or another welfare agency. It was to aid our law enforcement efforts by not draining the differently trained police officer in favor. Yeah. And their entire speech was one that essentially I could sum up as, we want to grow and we want to follow these people. We want to see how well we did. And I'm like, no, you hand them over. But anyhow, we have always to be on alert.
Yes, you're absolutely right that. And again, the terminology can be confusing. The word navigator is being used in 2 different sessions.
Right.
We use the navigator for the law enforcement arm. State law created this other group of navigators that are assigned to kind of follow and be sort of the parents to try to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. And that's certainly something we have to keep an eye on, although it's funded by the state. By
So
Medicaid.
is that what we call case management, case managers, or,
Well, yeah,
and they've changed the name now to
Yeah.
navigators?
Yeah.
Okay, I just had to
It's-
clarify that.
it's
Yeah.
roughly the same. So, yeah, I apologize. And it is
Oh,
confusing.
I wasn't, no, I thought you were doing fine. I was just, that's an inside view I had. We also have that mental health tax. And the Board of County Commissioners will have to make a decision at some point. And it's not the easiest decision in the world because it means putting a 0.1% sales tax on or maintaining it. We currently have it. Sunsets, we have to plan on that. Feedback from the Board of Health would seem like a nice thing to have.
So it is set to sunset a year from 2024, about the time of next fall, that the 24 elections, right? At the end of the year? Or is it before?
think it's
can't remember
earlier than
what
that.
I can't remember what our deadline was.
If I had to guess, it was spring of 24.
Yeah, it's set to expire March of 24. So
March of
the
24,
the
okay.
board will have to consider it
So,
this
yeah,
year.
okay.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think it's absolutely appropriate then for this board to weigh in whether we should continue it or adjust it or modify it. It does sunset. So,
I got it. Thank you for that note. I'll put that on an upcoming agenda then.
Yeah.
Something that we need to discuss. Going on to the next item, there's just briefly, Carol or Gina wanted to talk about, there's a public health contest. We had talked about that before. And please fill us in.
Yeah, so I wanted to share really quickly. Okay, Carol's going to hand out a little flyer. Public Health Week is coming up the beginning of April. And to sort of recognize Public Health Week, we are doing a public service announcement contest. So we're just hoping the community can get involved and be engaged and let us know kind of what health items they feel strongly about or want to advocate for. So it's a really simple contest. You could submit a video, a drawing, or something of that sort. And so we're hoping to just do this little fun contest. We will post the winner during Public Health Week just to recognize that. We were wondering if the Board of Health would like to have a member involved to help us select the winner. I know Lindy's name actually came up, but we've had quite a few discussions about public service announcements. So if there's interest in that, we're happy to involve a member of the Board of Health.
Seems
nominate
seems
Lindy.
fair, yes.
I nominate Lindy.
But I must say, there's no need for anybody to apply because I'm going to submit a video of the beaches in Florida during spring break, so I'm sure I'll win.
Is that the public health message on the use of alcohol?
There are many aspects.
Show one from the seventies and one from today, and you'll see how far we've declined.
It sounds like it's a team effort.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, thank you. That's good. And I also noticed it's on the, right on the front page of the HHS website.
Yep, it's on the website. I think we also posted it on our Facebook page, so. Oh, good.
So is there any specific effort to go out to teachers in all the schools? Okay.
Yep, I think we blasted it to a number of our email listservs and whatnot. So we're hoping for some.
I suppose if I had
Participation.
mastered the magic code, I would have figured that out, right? I think we're supposed to take a picture of that square.
And I've got just two more items. This one, I'll open it for discussion if they want, but I think I just want to say something. This is something to think about in the future, but lithium batteries. You know, we have mandates of the cars from the governor saying that they want all electric cars. And I'm actually a little bit of an expert in batteries and have found that the lithium batteries are 95% non-recyclable, where a standard, what we call lead acid batteries, are 95% recyclable. So all these Teslas and electric cars, which I'm all in favor of green energy when it works, but there's a brown part of this energy that people aren't seeing, and this is these batteries. So Tesla's first cars came out, I think 8 or 10 years ago. I'm not exactly sure the date, but these batteries will only last 7 to 10 years. After that, they are dead, where, like I just mentioned, the lead acid batteries can be recycled. So my question is our landfill able to handle these electric car batteries that are starting to die and starting to enter the landfill right now? Those old Teslas are dying now. And are they able to keep it out of the water system? Are they able to keep these toxins out of our environment? My feeling is probably no. And I just want to plant the seed that this is something that the Board of Health is going to have to see, because I see a huge toxic nightmare coming down the pipeline from the green energy idea.
Speaking narrowly for the landfill, they don't have a license for.
They don't take them.
They
for
don't,
toxic,
and I called myself, I called last week and I asked them and I was told they don't know. Then they came back. I had a manager called me yesterday. They do not take them. So the only answer right now, if you own a electric vehicle and it's dying in Cowlitz County, is to take it up to Seattle.
Yeah.
And that's the only answer, and that's a pretty bad hardship. But more and more, I'm more looking at the point that these are going to end up in our landfill, and they're starting to build up soon, and it's something that nobody's talking about.
Yeah.
I just want to bring it up, and later on we can talk about it.
Well, I might be able to add a little bit to it, because I had a conversation with the gentleman today, and if he's right, they're looking at a disposal site in Nevada, close to where they mine the lithium, and that actually Tesla owns the property and is think of it as like a Hanford. It has to be so many miles from a city, because if you had a catastrophe or an explosion, it would take some stuff. But if this gentleman is correct, that it is being looked into, because it is a problem.
So I know that in discussions and workshops I've been to about plastic, the emphasis is the laws need to be changed to make sure that the producers bear the ultimate responsibility of taking taking that waste and refuse back and reprocessing it. Something similar with the producers of lithium batteries or the producers of the car need to be the ones responsible for disposing of them safely. Because if it's too complicated for the homeowner or too expensive or too difficult because there's only one location, they'll be in our forests. Yeah, and we don't want that. So
Yep.
we've got to have a process that'll take care of that.
A quick question, since you are a declared expert.
Just batteries.
What's the energy density between a lead acid battery and a lithium ion? I think that's wherein the problem lies, but
Lithiums can hold their charge a little bit longer, but
it's not so much longer, but how much per pound, how much charge per
oh,
pound?
if you're talking actual physical density, yes.
Well, it's energy density in a packet anyhow. Okay.
The lithium is much lighter, and that's why they are preferred for electric cars. They are lighter with good energy density. Problem is just they're toxic and they die.
Well, but there might have been also pressure. Wait,
Yeah.
a lead acid
Expensive.
battery uses acids and lead, and those are things people typically don't like.
Yeah. Yep, I agree with that too. The last thing I have is in all the paperwork and things that come through the county, I can't read every sentence, but I've noticed that that our health officer contract is expiring this year. Are there any thoughts on that?
You're talking about the health officer contract?
With Dr. Melnick.
Correct. It's
Is
it's
that the
set
end
to
of- At the end
expire.
of the year, is that right?
Yeah,
The contract with Clark County to supply him, yeah.
Oh, yeah, but it expires when?
this year. I think December.
The end of the year, yeah. Just like with everything else, I do not like institutionalized respondent, if you will. So I think we ought to go out for an RFQ or whatever the proper name is to see what kind of response we would get.
RFQ would be request for qualifications, in this case, not quote.
Right, right.
So can I have some clarification? So is his contract expiring with Clark County or with Cowlitz? I thought I
This-
heard both.
We have a contract with Clark County, so that's the contract that expires, yeah. I think
Yeah.
staff can work, and that's something that can be done, absolutely.
So we actually send a check to Clark County
Mhm.
and Clark County then sends you a check?
Once
My-
Dr. Melnick checks off that he's okay, right?
So we do have a contract with Clark County, so be an interlocal agreement with Clark County to purchase health officer services. And Dr. Melnick and Dr. Krager are the employees of Clark County, and we purchase the services from the county. And they're the health officers that are in those positions, if that makes sense.
So Clark County is sort of a pass-through in this case.
Sort of. I mean, we're purchasing
I mean,
services from them.
We know Dr. Krager is or Dr. Melnick Krager are our health officers. Clark County cannot just randomly say someone else is our health officer.
That's correct, because there is actually I believe it's the Board of Health has a resolution that officially appoints Dr. Melnick, Dr. Krager as our health officers.
Exactly
And
what
then
I
the money
recall.
passes through the Board of County Commissioners.
Do you remember the reason we go through Clark?
Because we don't, my
We still-
understanding is we don't have a full-time health officer.
We
So it's
we did a
part-time.
search several years ago, about probably 2013, 2014, and finding someone that is qualified and has the skill set to be a health officer was really tough. And
I think Dr. Vines was also the
Dr. Vines,
same
yeah, and
situation.
we contracted with Dr. Vines like separately, like in a professional services agreement for quite a while. And she was also the health officer for Multnomah County. Because generally, it's not a full-time job, but it's 24/7. So I call Dr. Krager at 3 a.m.
Yeah,
and he just loves that.
but we are not bound by anything other than the RCWs, right? In other words, we haven't signed other agreements that constrain us.
No, just the contract to purchase the services.
Just the contract.
Well, and that's why I'm bringing it up since, it's, going to expire before we wait till the last minute, but I thought we should look into it. And so you mentioned an RFQ. Is that something the commissioners release?
It's a Board of Health. That's a Board of Health function. That's kind of one of our two jobs. That's the one's to set priorities and the other one is to.
And staff would write the RFQ. That's usually what we do for other services, and then it would be published by, I'm
I
guessing,
like
the
that
Board
answer.
of Health or Board of County Commissioners. That would be a Doug Jensen question, but it would be published publicly like any request for proposals would be. We're just looking for folks that are qualified, and then to be able to look at who would be interested.
Can you do that? Do we need a vote for that? Or can you?
And we can start a draft and bring it to commissioners and Board of Health, I'm assuming.
Well,
I
the
mean,
Board of Health.
you're kind of one and the same, but you're not.
We're not.
Yeah. So we can work
Well,
through that.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. That would be good.
That might be a discussion for our April regular meeting.
I think so.
Sure.
And does anybody else have any comments under that? Otherwise, I'll open it to public comments.
I do want to mention though, because we're going to be looking at a request for proposal, that doesn't suggest displeasure in what the current officers are doing. We
Correct.
just have not done this before and they're, I mean, I think it's a different process if we're firing somebody.
No,
That's-
it's
Yeah, that's not the intent.
only because I saw the date there.
Okay.
And actually, when I first saw it, it was December of last year and I was told it's gonna expire in 2 weeks. Luckily, I made a mistake and read it wrong, but yeah.
And I will
So-
say too that I remember when we entered into this agreement with Clark County, part of the idea of doing it was that sharing, if you will, or purchasing health officer services from another county. Quite often, if we're going to have some type of an issue in one county, the neighboring county that shares a border is probably going to get the same issue. If there's a measles case in Cowlitz County, Clark County is going to be in the know. We really share a border, which makes, we share a lot of constituents that work in both counties. So I think it's served us well. Again, they're like, I call them 24/7, they're available, and that's what we would hope to find is someone that we can.
So you're not
need
implying,
24/7.
that we got COVID from Clark County. are you?
Well,
Yeah.
and you see it in waves though, because, and it's same with Wahkiakum, they're just, and Lewis, right? Those things just, it's natural. And
I think you are.
yeah, and I think, we know the types of things we need, someone that's, available 24/7. Because there are times that we have to call, tuberculosis is a big deal. Health officers have to be knowledgeable in that. So there's.
So I know
a regular-
tuberculosis is something that is a constant struggle that we get cases every once in a while here. That doesn't necessarily come from commuters going back and forth.
No.
It's kind of within defined communities that
Yeah.
are.
And it can be, there's often family members. I can recall that we kind of shared a tuberculosis patient with Portland at one point
Mhm.
because they had family in both areas and they would go back and forth. And the other thing is, a health officer is a medical doctor and, but they also deal with septic systems. So it's very unique. It's not your typical doctor stuff.
Mm.
Yeah. Sure. I got a question, but I'm going to back you up just a hair if you're okay with that. Back to the mental health tax that Commissioner Morton's brought up. Sounds like that proposal, we have to have something decided by the end of the year. And I'm wondering when since it sounds like it comes to the Board of Health and it doesn't meet weekly like we do, when we might see that. Because when I look through that, we're talking, I count up 26 bodies that are part of that thing. I don't know how many FTE, so I think it's a fairly significant decision. And I don't want it last minute type thing, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's the use of that mental health sales tax has transitioned over time. In the beginning, when it was brought forth, I think it was 2012, 2014, 2013, I don't know, 2012.
Divided by thirds, right? Remember,
Yeah.
it's divided by
It
thirds.
started out with the money going into the community funding different programs, and it was a lot of focus on children and youth as
Yeah.
well as the therapeutic court system. And over time, that has transitioned to where all of the money, most of the money, all
Looks
of the
like
money
most
is
of it
now
is
being
drug
used
court.
in county departments for the jail, the prosecutor.
And I think our plan was to work with the Board of County Commissioners through that process. I think that's who originally enacted the tax and has that, I think that's where the authority lies with the tax itself as the county
Okay.
commissioners. So we'll have, I think, some frequent meetings to talk about that.
But I think it makes absolutely perfect sense that you do a presentation to this full expanded board so that we know the pie chart is very helpful in how that money is divided up, because you are right, it has changed over time. But it's health related and priorities should be at least reviewed by this board and recommended to the Board of Commissioners. So I think that's a very fair request to make, so.
I think so.
A question. So you say that it's evolved over time and initially, and memory serves me, it was distributed to different organizations throughout the community that addressed health needs. And was it a formal process for it to just suddenly go to the county departments? And is that just backfilling the county budget?
No, originally, there was a sort of a third of the funds set aside for child and youth prevention programs, a third of the funding set aside for therapeutic court programs, and then a third of the funding was set aside for uninsured or underinsured populations in the community. And at the time the tax was first adopted, there were a lot of members of the community that were not covered by health insurance. And so that was part of the reason why. But over time, that changed a lot, and most people have some type of health insurance now. So that third sort of bucket was left untouched, which is why or how there ended up being a buildup of that funding over time. Over the years, the child and youth prevention programs were funded through competitive RFP processes with the commissioners, and over the years, there was sort of just this shift that happened with, and please, any of you correct me if I'm wrong, over time with the behavioral health needs inside our county departments, like the jail and therapeutic court programs with our law enforcement and whatnot. So it was just sort of this gradual shift over time of a need that was getting bigger within the county departments.
So one large group of people who do not have healthcare coverage from from Medicaid, okay, are those who are in our custody in the jail. And as mental health has become an increasing problem with those in our jails, that has become the dominant funding bucket. So I think the last time I looked, it was a little over 50% of that, 1% going just to jail, mental health costs.
Can I ask a question?
And it may have changed since.
Can I ask a question? I just wondered, is it doing any good? The tax money that's going to the jail? I mean, is there a way to quantify what it's doing and how effective it's been and all these other programs? Because it sounds like it's a big need.
I
But
think
is
the
it-
big portion of it is
Is
drug
it
court.
needing that need?
When I
Mhm.
look through the bodies it funded, the big portion looked to me to be drug court.
Drug court.
Yeah, one of the things that I think the Board of County Commissioners has asked of this, and we've relayed this message that it'd be helpful for the departments who receive the funding to come and do a presentation on the funding and how it has been useful for the department. So I think that's forthcoming this year.
I have another question. So when it sunsets, does the county commissioners and or the Board of Health have the authority to extend that sunset, or does it need to go back to the voters?
No, it's a decision of the Board of County Commissioners.
It was never voted on. And the original commissioners, and that was actually before I came, December before I took office, they adopted it, but it was sunsetted. I think it was 5 years, yeah. And then 5 years, we had substantially new county commissioner, and we did it for 4 years. But it's at our discretion. And one of the thinking from my perspective was we ought to let the voters vote on it, but that didn't make it. Because what happens is the departments become dependent on those
Right.
funds for core activities. And so I don't risk the voters saying no, so.
That's why I want it earlier than later, because we're talking,
Yeah.
if my math was right, 26 bodies.
Yeah,
And
I
I'd-
think
Go ahead.
I'd like to chip in a little bit. MJ's question was totally spot on. It actually has been used really to fund staff. And then the argument becomes, is it appropriate? Which staff is appropriate or is it appropriate? Initially, we had all kinds of things, and Dennis can talk about how things morphed into 3 different groups of focus and all that, but that's sort of irrelevant to the position we're in at the moment, which is the 26 FTEs approximately. And the tax was supposed to expire last year, and we authorized a 2-year extension, if I recall correctly.
There was a shorter extension in there.
Yep.
I might get them mixed up if. we-
Right, so
yeah.
it was the last extension, and part of why we did that is there was gonna be a new board at some point, and we generally try not to tie up the new board. But then I don't like to leave when an impression, I don't want to leave potentially an impression which I do not subscribe to. And when the chairman asked, when the chairman of the BOCC asked about whether this, I think he asked whether this reflected on happiness or not. My intro into it is, it's categorically the right thing to do, always to say, I am here today. What should I do tomorrow? Well, I better open my eyes and see what's around here tomorrow. But I don't want people to misunderstand. I think there are some issues that were not handled well by the health officer, and I think ought to have been handled in a different way. And so that's going to be an issue for me that's going to weigh in a final decision.
So another question having to do with this, wasn't there a tax that the citizens did vote on, a mental health tax that did go out to the voters, a certain percentage for something a while back, 5-10 years ago?
The last tax that was voted was 911. I think that was in 2016.
Hmm.
Well, so what I see is that this is a new topic for me that just came up today. And so I think we're going to have to set a meeting with the clerks and make sure we have plenty of time to go through it, because it looks like it's going to take some time. And so with that, I'd open it to public comment. Does anybody have any comments? Anybody have any further comments? Well, I thank you all for coming, and let's go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 3:09. Thank you.